Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for November 28th, 2023, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us for this review episode, everyone, where Brendan and I will figure out military tactics and present an essay as a way to show pride to one Napoleon.
And piss off all the historians along the way.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think Ridley Scott would appreciate that kind of brazenness. And also, while making everyone mad, giving everyone the bird anyway and telling them to take a hike.
Oh, Ridley, you madman.
That's what he does.
I love you. I love you, dude. You're a good man, Ridley. Yeah, you really are.
I do love that about him, that he just doesn't give a shit.
Absolutely. What was his response when historians came out and said that they recognized how historically inaccurate Napoleon was? I think Ridley said, like, were you there? Or something like that.
That sounds like something he would say, yeah.
It would.
Like, you weren't there, how do you know?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah, that is absolutely remarkable. Ridley Scott is one of those guys that'll tell you how he feels. He's not going to sugarcoat anything, and it's why we love him. All right. His new film, Napoleon, we somewhat talked about this briefly on the main show this last week, episode 562.
A little bit.
Primarily because we did a Ridley Scott retrospective of sorts. We did a little conversation about how we feel about him overall as a filmmaker. It was a really fun conversation if you want to go and check that out.
Yeah.
We didn't get into Napoleon a ton. We did talk about its box office surprise.
Yeah.
It still has a little ways to go in order to make up its budget of about $150 million.
Yep.
Maybe a little bit more than that. But it's still surprised. It beat a Disney animated film at the box office, which is no small feat.
Not at all. Not at all.
So it might have some legs. It might actually end up doing way better than anyone anticipated, which is very exciting. We'll see if that translates to any further success when it comes to award season. With all of that laid out, though, let's go ahead and get into Napoleon. So it is, of course, directed by Ridley Scott. It stars Joaquin Phoenix, Vanessa Kirby, and a bazillion others that come and go throughout the film.
Is that an accurate number?
Those two.
Would the historians appreciate that number?
Exactly. We're being historically accurate about all of this.
Yeah, we are. Bazillion. Yeah.
If you're not familiar with Napoleon, shocking, it is about Napoleon. It's an epic that details the checkered rise and fall of French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte and his relentless journey to power through the prism of his addictive, volatile relationship with his wife, Josephine.
You forgot one major plot detail. That destiny brought him that lamp shot.
That destiny. Yes, we don't want to forget that as well. Whoever wrote that on IMDb should be fired. All right, Brendan, what did you think about Napoleon?
Well, let's go back and at least acknowledge something that we talked about in episode 562 when we talked about Ridley Scott. He likes to tinker with his movies. He is the king of the director's cut.
Yep.
He is the king of tinkering. I'm trying to fuse words to give an official title to him.
It's either him or George Lucas, one of the two.
It is one of the two. I'm kind of leaning more towards Ridley Scott because he has vastly improved at least a few of his films.
That's true.
Some can argue that the tinkering done with the Star Wars special editions, not
Maybe
necessarily
not
the best editions, right? So at least Ridley Scott has a fairly successful track record with regard to updating his films that get released in theaters. And I bring that up to say is that we already know Napoleon is getting a 4-hour cut that's coming to Apple TV.
Yep.
I don't know when it's coming. It might be this weekend. It's going to be sometime this year, I think. And we talked about this, that how we feel about this film that's playing in theaters could very much change for better and for worse, depending on how we feel about the 4-hour version, which is why my review for this movie, Napoleon, that we saw in theaters, is to be continued. That is my review. That's all I really have to say about it right now.
To be continued.
Well,
Okay.
because maybe it's because I went into this movie knowing that it has an eventual 4-hour cut coming, which is perhaps a dangerous thing. Like, it's something we probably should not have known, right? Because then we could have judged the movie on its own merits. But this movie really does feel like an abridged version of something bigger that we haven't seen yet. And to put it even more cruelly, again, the movie that's playing in theaters right now, we haven't seen the 4-hour cut yet. Let's make that clear. We've only seen the 2.5-hour movie that's playing in theaters. It feels like it doesn't even have a beginning, middle, nor end. It feels like a sequence of chapters with no real narrative arc to it. And that's a shame, because what we are seeing, aesthetically speaking, as far as the energy is concerned, the sense of humor of it all, I dug a lot of what I was seeing. I think there is a great movie within what we're seeing here. I really like the sense of humor here. I actually think the movie is quite farcical and kind of funny. It seems as though Ridley Scott is trying to go for his own version of Barry Lyndon in some ways. And I think it mostly gets there, which is why I'm very interested in seeing this 4-hour cut, because if it does recontextualize much of what we saw and actually makes it feel like a complete experience, this could potentially be a very good, if not great, Ridley Scott film. But as it is, it just feels like an incomplete one to me right now, which is why I feel like I don't have much to say about it yet, other than I really enjoyed what I was watching. The battle sequences are incredible. I like a lot of the performances. I don't think there are really any characters in this story, but I like the performances and I like the tone that it's going for. So I feel like it's not there yet. And I think it could be. We just have to wait and see.
Okay. Well, I hate to make this a mundane conversation, but I do agree with so much of what you're saying there. I think to maybe offer a little bit more context as well, I want to circle back to our review of Rustin that we did last week.
Oh, okay.
Now, for those of you that didn't listen to that episode, essentially our issues with that film, it had a great central performance, but we talked about how the movie was a little bit too broad and vague for any real nuance to register. And I think that is exactly what Napoleon is suffering from as well. As a spectacle, I am with you. I do think it is remarkable in terms of its epic scale and the battle sequences. It's really great. I love how all of that is staged and framed. As a historical drama, it is an underbaked mess. Huge disjointed mess. It just doesn't know what it wants to be. It has the same DNA of what happened to Kingdom of Heaven, right? Meaning it seems as if there's missing context everywhere, as if this was cut to showcase as much action as possible, but by doing so, it severely undermines character and storytelling. The action might be staged well, and it certainly is intense, but for a man with a reputation for being one of the best military tacticians of all time, we rarely ever see him demonstrating that prowess. Barking orders is not the same as reverberating tactics. I guess in some ways I appreciate that it's not just told to us, that we see it unfold and understand that he's a great general, but I'm not sure the film is able to bridge that middle ground. His relationship with Josephine is emphasized quite a bit in this film, and while I don't think it's fully realized for the reasons you're talking about, it's such a big part of the story that I do think it works more than it doesn't. I think at the very least you understand his torment, even if we don't feel it.
Yeah.
And weirdly, it is quite funny at times. I agree with
Yeah.
you. There is a
Yeah.
farcical nature to this film that I just did not expect. And I love, 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 love how Joaquin Phoenix leans into that absurd humor in his performance. It's so good. Really, really great.
I think
So
you're so great because you have boats. Like I
just
will
the
say, like
best.
while it almost feels like there is no real script to this movie, at least the version that we saw in theaters, but there are lines of dialogue here that are bitingly hilarious.
Absolutely. It's so good. And I love that he does a little bit of The Last Duel, but Napoleon, I feel like, takes it even to another level where
Mhm.
it takes place in France in the late 1700s. There
Mhm.
is no attempt at accents. They are
No,
not trying
no.
to mimic a French accent. It's either full on American if it's an American actor, or British accent if they're
Oh,
a British actor, and that's it. Like it
yeah,
stops there.
yeah.
There's a little bit in The Last Duel where they're trying to have some fun, some playfulness, despite
Mhm.
everything still being in English.
Yeah,
This film abandons it at all cost, and
yeah,
I do love that because again, it taps into the farcical nature of everything,
yeah.
and Joaquin Phoenix just some biting line deliveries in this film.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just so
I
good.
I know I compared it to Barry Lyndon, but if anything, as far as the abrasive, farcical nature of it, it probably has more in common with something like Amadeus, right? Milos Forman's Amadeus, at least like
Sure, yes,
the almost sexualized
absolutely.
energy of it too.
That's a great point, and I watched that for the first time earlier this year. So now I now understand that reference.
Great movie, one of the best
Yeah,
picture winners of all time.
very good. And yeah, there is a little bit of that here for sure,
Yeah.
like this abrasive, heightened quality
There,
that
there, yeah.
is
There's a
really great.
scene involving him under a dinner table, crawling
Oh
towards
my gosh,
Josephine. Like that
yes.
had Amadeus written all over
Oh
it.
yes, it does. Absolutely, it does. I love that. Or that moment Napoleon walks in and Josephine is just getting her hair done and putting on makeup, but he's just like a child, just like all giddy, like
Is he just go
looking
like?
at her. That is so good. I absolutely love that. So yeah, I mean, this film as a comedy, and this circles back to the whole Ridley Scott Martian thing,
Yeah,
because people will label this an historical drama. Is it a comedy though? It might be. Watch out.
well, that's why I'm so curious about what this 4-hour version is going to give us. If it's more context in the way that Kingdom of Heaven gave us,
Mhm.
or if it's more of that kind of stuff.
So good.
I
Just the
I
best.
weirdly feel like because this feels like an abridged version for something bigger, all of the good bits are here already, and it's
Mhm.
just a matter of reformatting them for a grander narrative that makes more dramatic sense. And
Yeah.
that's what we just haven't seen yet. This movie feels like a collage. It really
It is.
does.
It's a collage movie. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that it doesn't feel like a complete movie as it is, uh, be, because there are aspects of what we're seeing here that I do find really fascinating and potentially compelling. I love the dynamic between Napoleon and Josephine. Their this quest for dominance that they have over each other, I found really compelling in a way
Yeah.
that was kind of a weird comparison because it's not romantic in this comparison I'm about to make, but in an almost like Daniel Plainview, Eli Sunday kind of way.
It is, it really is that. Like, and to
Yeah.
your point about missing context, there's a moment in this film where he comes home from Egypt because he finds out that she's been sleeping with someone else.
Yeah.
And he gets home and he's angry and he makes her beg to stay in this marriage and to stay in this house. And I want you to repeat that I'm your entire world, or whatever he says.
Yeah.
The very next scene, without any context whatsoever, you get that exchange, cut to them sitting on the couch with next to each other, and it's her doing the same thing. We're like,
Yeah.
you need me. And why don't you need to say it out loud? Like you can't. You're nothing without me. And he, follows her orders. And it's like, this is what's going on here.
This is
just off the like.
It's choppy, but it's like this has the room to be really, really interesting.
And I would bet everything that in the 4-hour version, there is something in between those two moments to make sense of that reversal.
Yeah.
But
I wouldn't be surprised.
We don't get it here.
We don't get it here, and I have to be careful how much I bring up the 4-hour version that we haven't seen yet, because I don't want to paint a picture of what that film could be, only to be disappointed, right? If anything, it could be just as bad of a movie as we get.
A 4-hour version of this.
Maybe there's just like an hour and a half of something we didn't see that plays at the beginning or the end or something. I don't know.
We don't know. You're right.
I have no idea. I can only hope, because what we saw in theaters here does carry the same flaws and qualities that Kingdom of Heaven first had before it got its director's cut.
We're hoping for a Kingdom of Heaven. And honestly, as I was sitting there watching it in the theaters, it was my first thought was, this is Kingdom of Heaven. We knew going into that movie there was going to be a director's cut. It came out not too long afterwards. They shot it and edited those two versions at the same time.
Yeah.
And the director's cut comes out. It clearly vastly remedies so much that was wrong with the theatrical cut.
Right.
And while you're right, it does pigeonhole us a little bit in terms of expectations, anticipation, what a 4-hour version of this could be. But you can't help to sit there and think, okay, where is the 4-hour version going to, like, how is it going to remedy these holes? And it does seem, because it's so choppy and uneven, you called it a collage earlier, which I think is very apt. Another way to articulate it is that this is a 2.5-hour teaser trailer.
It kind of is. Yeah. Which is ironic, because
for a 4-hour movie that's about to come.
Because the actual teasers we got for this quote unquote teaser are better than the full teaser we're getting. And basically, this is the trailer. This is the official trailer.
Exactly. It's a 2.5-hour trailer for a 4-hour movie that's going to drop on Apple TV.
Well, I'll tell you this.
That's what it is.
This trailer makes the movie look pretty damn awesome then.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a great marketing tool, and that's why I'm here. And while, yes, I'm not high on the movie as it stands, but we know this isn't the full version. Yeah. And so it's hard to fully judge it, because we've only seen half the movie, or a little bit more than half.
I will say, while it sounds like we might be a little bit cynical right now, I do want to at least add some positivity to this conversation, because, again, I'm trying to be careful not to add expectations that might not get fulfilled. But if the aspects of this movie that do suggest a great movie here, if they are realized in the 4-hour version, I think we have one of the best movies of the year. I think there are attributes here that could lend themselves to being among the best, at least the best moments of the year. Not even just in those moments of comedy that we already talked about, which are amazing. Ridley Scott should do more comedies. He really should do more comedies.
I know. We talked about that on the main show. You look at his filmography, and there's a handful that you could label comedy-ish, but not
maybe
many.
Matchstick Men, maybe at least
Matchstick
before
Men,
The Martian.
Sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Thelma and Louise has some comedic sensibilities to it.
Maybe House of Gucci is a bit more. That's more campy than comedy, I'd say. And even then, it doesn't fully lean into its camp. But even so, like the moments of pure blissful sexual joy on both Josephine and Napoleon's faces here, it's so chuckling. I love it. And not just that, the battle sequences here I think are among some of my favorites I've seen in a Ridley Scott film, at least of his period pieces. Like they are
really great,
really amazing. Like, I can't believe he was able to craft at least those battle sequences only a few years after already doing The Last Duel.
Yeah,
it's amazing what he's able to do and how big it looks, how it's all in camera. It feels like there's so little utilization of visual effects and green screen. It is
Yeah.
so beautifully captured. Like no one makes movies like that anymore.
I know
and I love.
they really don't. And I think you make a great point because a lot of other directors, and perhaps some of it is he did get a pretty decent budget here, so he didn't have to cheat. But so much of the action does happen in camera. I think of that last action sequence you get, and the British form this circle, and you see
The battle
French
of
having a
Battle of
circle around.
Waterloo, I think it is. Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible because all of that, you see that entire choreography forming in camera. Like none of it is choppy or up close. There's some of that, but a lot of it is in camera, and it's brutal and it's visceral. Yeah, you just don't see it all that much. My only, I hate to say criticism because again, I wonder if this is something that's coming, but the biggest hurdle for me with this film is that we're talking about a guy who is more than anything else studied for his military tactics. That's what he's known for.
Yeah.
In fact, the film tells us at the end, he led 61 battles in his lifetime. And over the course of those 61 battles, 3 million people died. Some of them are considered the bloodiest battles in the history of mankind up until that time anyway. And this is his legacy.
Yeah.
Where is that in this film? And
It's-
that to me is
it's
where
brushed
the
over.
Rustin,
Yeah.
and that to me is where the Rustin comparison comes in, because we talked in that film about how it's about this and it's about that and this other thing over here and this other thing over here. And as a result, nuance is hard to find there as much as we like what it's aiming for. The central performance is really great. And I couldn't help but think about Rustin in that regard with this film, where, again, we have a central performance that I really like, but it's, about Josephine. It's about him rising to power and becoming king of France. It's about him being a general. We don't learn about any of the tactics that he's known for, but we certainly see him in command. And we see several battles here that are really staged and choreographed, as we're talking about here. And so it's like all of these things, but none of it carries weight. Maybe the Josephine stuff a little bit because of the performances, but mostly everything it's just there. It's fluff.
It's very high level. If there is any additional weight outside of the power play between Napoleon and Josephine, it's maybe emphasizing the almost, I guess, dictatorial attributes of Napoleon as well. The fact that his rise to leadership as emperor and king of France was almost like this hostile takeover of sorts.
Yeah.
So
he was approached for. Again, I don't know the historical accuracies of it, not all of the details anyway. But in the context of this film, it's not even that it was his rise to power, which might be what really happened or what it wants to imply. I don't really know. But the way it's presented here, because it may or may not be missing context, is that he was asked to form an alliance, essentially. It's not something that he did on his own terms. Even when it comes to being king, he was approached for it.
Yeah.
So
I guess if anything,
that idea of dictatorship, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I guess if anything, it mostly comes through in Joaquin Phoenix's performance, showcasing Napoleon as basically being succumbed to that idea, and he kind of relishes in the opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Like he seems to find great joy in pissing people off. In many ways, it's almost like Napoleon is Ridley Scott. It almost feels like he is a cipher for Ridley Scott's
brazen,
own persona.
Arrogant.
Yeah,
Gets in his own way.
kind of is actually. Yeah. Okay, so this is actually a biopic on Ridley Scott. I get it now. Okay.
Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
And, I mean, again, I think the seeds of what you're talking about are very compelling, and maybe they are fully realized and captured in the 4-hour version. I don't know. It's hard to say, but here it's too choppy for it to carry much weight. Even if from scene to scene, there might be a compelling dynamic. For example, there's a moment where he has a scene with, I believe it's the ruler of Russia.
Alexander, is that it?
Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
And they come to some sort of truce. And again, because there's so much context that is cut, the next scene is him invading Russia after they came to a truce.
It's Alexander the First, the Russian Tsar, I believe it is.
Yeah, and look, like the power dynamics, the political angling, I just feel like is so disjointed here and lacks lucidity. It's if you don't know the story of Napoleon, if you don't do your history, if you don't read about his life on Wikipedia before going into the movie, a lot of it is going to be baffling.
It's going to feel like just a visual. It's going to feel like the visual aid of a history book that's not given to you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Even though we ironically get words on the screen to set the stage for the French Revolution, the beheading of Marie Antoinette, which is depicted here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the movie does call out in chapter form some crucial historical events that occur, such as what is it? The Reign of Terror is what opens up. So we're actually seeing some perceived truth in the historical depiction here, but to what purpose is what I'm keep questioning with regard to this specific version of this story playing in theaters. And I think that's what's missing.
I very much agree. I don't know if I have too much to add. The one thing I will say though, and then we can wind this conversation down, at least for now, I think we will have to have a Napoleon part. I don't know how to say two in French, but part two.
Is that part deux? No, I think if the 4-hour version is worth talking about, whether it's good or bad, I'm not opposed to doing another review of this. I'm really not. Whether it be an official review like this or maybe Patreon content, I'm not really sure. We can decide that as we go. But there might be more to mine from with that 4-hour cut.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I want to note though, until we get to that point, is the battle before they invade Russia. I'm trying to recall the name of it here, but it's one where it's a snowy landscape in Austria. I'm probably butchering the.
Is it the battle of Austerlitz? I think it is. It's when Napoleon defeats the Austrians and Russians.
The ice one. So this is where I think the film does get to have its cake and eat it too a little bit. Yeah. Because again, I noted earlier, Napoleon has a reputation for his military tactics. The film does not talk about it at all. Napoleon as a character does not talk about it at all. It's never brought up at all. Not once in this movie. Imagine having a movie about Neil Armstrong and you don't talk about space or going to the moon. Like, that's kind of what this is.
Kind of what it is, yeah.
And anyway, we get to that sequence. And despite the lack of this film addressing Napoleon's reputation and legacy, this is where you do see it in a really interesting way, right? Because they are spotted. And he knows that they're spotted. He's waiting for them to come. The enemy comes and they have an initial attack, and then you see them flank the left, and then he calls out an order and you see them flank the right. And he knows that because of what's happening, that they're going to flee in a certain direction. And he wants that to happen because it's this covered up lake, essentially. Which, as you see in the trailer, if you see the trailer, you kind of know what's happening here. And then they launch this full-on assault. And, where they discover that they're on this huge lake. That to me is fascinating because of the scope and scale and the cinematography and everything we talked about earlier. Where you actually see the tactics, even though it's not told to us as to what's happening or that he's this magician as a tactician. We see that visually. I love that. I wish there was more of that, and maybe there is, again, in the 4-hour version. I don't know. But that's the one moment of this film where I felt like this is a Napoleon movie.
Yeah. Well, even so, like if that's the only scene in the 4-hour version that depicts the tactility of Napoleon, if it's interwoven in a narrative that takes advantage of it, it might be all you need. And the problem here is this abridged version, as it feels like, doesn't take advantage of it to have it make sense within the rest of the narrative to actually make that be the point. If anything, that battle feels like its own short film to demonstrate that tactility of Napoleon.
Yeah, that's true. That's a great point. And maybe the film, maybe Ridley Scott's angling here isn't to emphasize his legacy as much as he wants to really get into the depths of his relationship with Josephine. But so much of this movie is about his military career still. It's about him rising to power. It's about him being king and being a general. So what is the purpose of that if you're not going to delve into what defines him as a ruler, as a military tactician? Like, to me, that's where it just doesn't add up. If it was exclusively Josephine, if she was in the film 80% of it and it was a little of his rise to power, I get it. That's fine. We're subverting the idea of Napoleon. And it's becoming about this romance instead.
Well,
that's fine. But I didn't see that in this version, if that makes sense.
It gets clouded because of that choppiness you mentioned earlier. And the dynamic between Napoleon and Josephine, it's still there even after their divorce. Like there's almost like this codependency between them, like they can't live without each other. Even after the divorce, when Napoleon clearly wanted to father a child, so he had an heir, a son specifically, and Josephine could not get pregnant. That's part of the history there. But even after remarrying, they still write letters to each other. They still talk about this love and respect they have for each other, as if that their power play was something that kept them both alive. Like that is actually really interesting.
I agree. I love that. I mean, it suggests that his actions there in the end had nothing to do with how he feels about her, but it was, as you noted, a power play. And keeping his name as the ruler of France. And that's an interesting dichotomy for sure.
It is.
And I hope the film wrestles with that a little bit more. I still think it's interesting enough here. It's by far the most compelling thing of this movie, the theatrical version.
Agreed.
But I think there's potential for it to carry even more weight in a 4-hour version where we see more of these characters, because again, there's such a choppiness to the story here that it does feel as if that there's aspects of that relationship that was cut out. You can feel that, you can sense it. So as much as it is effective here, I think in the 4-hour version, we're going to get even more.
I hope so.
Probably going to be, at least that part of it will probably be pretty great. I would think.
Yeah, I hope so.
We'll see.
I mean, Ridley Scott has that track record. If this is another Kingdom of Heaven situation, like I will say this, the reason why I have even more hopes for it in that regard is that if I were to take the theatrical cut of Kingdom of Heaven and the theatrical cut of Napoleon, I still like Napoleon more. I think of the theatrical cuts, I think Napoleon has more potential still.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and that's why I'm really excited to see what happens here.
Yeah, and the irony may be the Kingdom of Heaven director's cut might be the better of those two. Who knows?
Who knows?
We'll see. But I agree with you. There's a lot of potential here, and I'm very excited to see how Ridley's vision of this really crystallizes, because coming off The Last Duel, which I think is great, one of his best movies, you do see that same guy here in spades, but he was told this cannot be 4 hours. We can't put this in theaters at 4 hours.
Yeah.
We can put it on Apple.
But I'm Ridley Scott. I do whatever I want. And then they found a compromise here. And and sadly, we're seeing part of that compromise early.
I will say, though, to Apple's credit, and Columbia Pictures, I guess, who is a part of this, and Sony? Sony helped make this as well? I'm trying to remember.
Columbia Pictures is a Sony company.
It's a Sony company. Okay, that's what it is. At any rate, I want to give them a little bit of credit because they did cut this down to put in theaters, and we talked about it earlier. So
Hey.
far, it's working.
It's doing okay so far. We'll see
It's
if that
doing
holds.
okay. You and I talked about on the main show this last week that our showings of this were packed.
They were.
full. People are going to see this.
Yeah.
So,
And I don't know how it was when you saw it, but the audience that I saw this with, they were kind of invested in it.
yeah.
Like the
Same.
moments of humor that we were talking about, there was a lot of laughter. It worked for people.
Yeah, same. So I do think there's certainly a level of the mainstream audiences are engaging with it in some way.
Yeah.
And it's making money. It's hard to blame the studios for making the choices they did.
Yeah, I'm with you.
It is effective. It's not a great movie, but it's working financially. Business-wise, I think they made the right call there. I'm just glad that Apple is willing to fund both versions. They need a version to put in theaters, and that so far is benefiting them, but they're also willing to give us a real cut of this.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. To be continued, indeed.
To be continued. I guess those are our final thoughts. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add here.
I don't. I mean, it's a Ridley Scott film. It's really well made. I feel like that goes without saying.
It is very well made. I like the performances. Joaquin Phoenix doing some incredible things here that I did not anticipate.
I just hope it ends up being an incredible movie once it comes out on Apple TV.
Absolutely. Channeling some fun energy as he did in Gladiator.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like it. I can't wait to see where it goes in the 4-hour version.
Yeah, same.
All right. Well, with that, I guess we'll go ahead and wind down here. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, let us know. Hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a review there. Subscribe on those platforms as well. Am I missing anything, Brendan?
Can't think of it. We don't have a full written review of this on the website, if I'm not mistaken. But when the 4-hour version, I'm sure it's coming too. We'd have to talk to our good friend Dave Giannini about that. But I'd be very curious to hear maybe a compare and contrast between the two versions here. Is probably something that we definitely want to talk about further and maybe even do in written form.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a lot of fun. We'll present that to Dave.
Yeah.
And
Dave, if you're listening, and I know you are, I just gave you an idea, $1 million idea.
And if I know Dave well enough, you know what his response is going to be, Brendan?
Already on it?
When are you going to write it? He's going to ask you to write that.
Hey, I just come up with the ideas. I don't actually execute them.
Brendan is just an ideas man. He's not a writing guy.
No. I'm not the sales guy. I'm the go-to-market guy.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, be sure to check out that review when it comes. We have a lot of great content up at ancestorfilm.com if you want to go and check that out. Earlier this week, we had reviews of Saltburn and Poor Things. You can go and check that out as well. I noted several times episode 562. It's been a full week here at In Session Film, but it's been great. It's busy season. It's award season. A lot to see and discuss. So, with all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast.
JD, you think you're so great just because you have podcasts.